Hey, thanks for tuning in. I was just running through the Indian classical text on astrology, which was written by Varaha Mihira, which is called as Brihat Samhita. Brihat Samhita is one of the most classical texts of Vedic astrology, which was written at around uh, between 4th to 6th century CE by Varaha Mihira. So while I was running through, it was very interesting that I've read that book previously, but it was only now this kind of stayed in my mind, where Varaha Mihira lists out some of the qualities, tendencies, or attitude, or behavior, or even ethics that astrologers, in terms of how an astrologer should be and what an astrologer should do, and what an astrologer can do, how an astrologer should look, and what are very important qualities of astrologers, and all those things. So it's a fairly lengthy chapter in the book, and I mean, considering the topic, it is a bit lengthy because even B.B. Raman in his Prashna Marga gives various qualities of astrologers in terms of how he should be and how he should react to the person or the querent or the client, whosoever, like however you may call it. But the amount of information that Varaha Mihira, surprisingly, in between fourth to sixth century, considering that uh, time period, I think it's one of the most phenomenal things that someone can do, especially in the antiquity. So I was thinking, like, I could do a series of videos on how an astrologer should be based on what Varaha Mihira says, and I think I'll also compare a little bit about what is possible today and what is not possible today, and what is happening today and what is really not happening today that should probably happen. So yeah, I hope this is an interesting series, and it could kind of interest uh, astrology enthusiasts, and also the non-astrologers who look forward or look up to astrologers to get their questions answered, or mysteries solved, or whatever it may be. So okay, so the first shloka, it's in Sanskrit, but I'll just tell it in English. Like, the astrologer should be of noble descent, good looking, modest in disposition, truthful, free from malice, impartial, with well proportioned limbs, all perfect and unimpaired, strong joints, undeformed, with fine hands, feet, nails, eyes, chin, teeth, ears, forehead, eyebrows, and head, with handsome physique and a voice deep and sonorous. For merits and demerits are generally the reflections of good and bad physical features. Okay, so there's a lot of things that is kind of controversial here, because I don't think many of them would agree to the statement that astrologer should be good looking and handsome physique and voice deep and sonorous. But see, voice deep is fine; it is understandable, because especially in those days, uh, the 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 conversation or connection between the astrologer and the client would have been much different than what it is now, because today we have a lot of um technological advancements which makes us use mics such as this, and I can talk to anyone. I mean, I can answer anyone's query who is staying like in another continent, through various online platforms like Skype or Zoom. But that wasn't the case those days, and there could have been many domestic disturbances that were um, in the environment or the surroundings where the consultation is taking place. So voice of an astrologer is probably very important, because the whatever astrologer says should not kind of be misinterpreted by the client due to some kind of disturbances or clarity in voice of an astrologer. So that is probably understandable. and that's true to some extent even today, because and not necessarily voice but also slang. For someone who is in USA might find the slang in which an Indian or other fellow Asian speaks in English. It is not some kind of discriminating factor, but still it's reality, because I've heard people, I've got comments saying that it's a bit difficult to follow my slang or the way I speak English. That I think there is a lot of uh, the heavy native accent that kind of transfers to my English language that I speak. So I mean, the same way it could be for an Indian. It's probably very difficult for Indians to even watch English movies without the subtitles. That's the case for so many people. So that's how it is. But in that context, I think it could be, but I don't think how far that is valid today. So it's a very questionable thing, but to some extent it is valid, because for whatever reason I told now, uh, the slang or accent differences, especially for those who come from a non-native English-speaking country, I think it matters a lot. So then I think noble, decent is very important. Astrologer should be noble. An astrologer should have noble thoughts, and astrologer should be truthful. Truthful is truthful is very important, because I think we should be true to almost everyone. But there are things where we need to convey some important things uh, that we see in a chart in a very constructive manner, not in a very negative manner, which would probably uh, bring down the morale of the client. So truthfulness is, it's not that we should be true in a blunt manner, but we can be true in a very constructive manner, which is what is very much applicable today, and that's what various astrology organizations preach as ethics or code of conduct for astrologers. Good looking, again, it's a very controversial statement. I don't think astrologer needs to be good looking, because I think at the end of the day, skill and the way of communicating something to the client matters, and if the client is happy, I think it's more than enough. But when a client chooses astrologer based upon his looks, I think good looking in the sense, I think it is more important to be or look pleasant. So in such a way that astrologers should present themselves to the client in a much more pleasant manner, like uh, in a very pleasing look or something like that. So that's what are not very offending, or uh, like, it should not be irritating to the client, because I think the way we carry ourselves kind of represents who we are and how we kind of interpret things and convey it to the client. So the question of knowledge doesn't come here, because a person who looks clumsy can have immense knowledge. So the question of knowledge doesn't come here. But maybe if a client sees an astrologer who's a bit clumsy, they might not even consult him. But today, him or her. But today, with the fact that there is a lot of platforms how astrologer can express themselves, maybe good looking is not an entirely valid phenomenon that we can accept today, because people can kind of find out whether an astrologer is good enough. People don't pay money just like that. They do a lot of research work before coming to an astrologer. So I think people have enough skills to choose their astrologer with the amount of technology that we have today, and we carry technology in our hand. So there is nothing more we need. I can just, if a client needs something, he can just choose through his mobile by surfing the internet. So that's how mobile we are today. So that doesn't apply largely today. And modest and disposition. Modest is very important, because uh, modesty is a quality that kind of helps us open, especially in the field of astrology, to remain open and be receptive to new ideas and new learnings, because whenever we look at a specific chart and a specific a placement of various planets in a person's birth chart, uh, the interpretation or the manifestation is not necessarily the same. So each and every chart is a new learning for an astrologer itself. And I've seen my grandfather give more than thousands of readings even before I read my first book. So I learned largely through oral tradition in the early days of my learning astrology. So it's important to be open and receptive to new ideas and be open to look at charts, and that is where modesty falls. So, and it is not that I mean, today astrology and the astrologers in the community is very open-minded, receptive, and largely inclusive about so many things. Even though there is a lot of debate happening on the other hand, but I think I've had some really good experiences where astrologers have been very much open to new ideas, and there is a lot of platforms that are available to astrologers to express themselves. And it is not like those days where communication was difficult. So one famous astrologer at one part of the world and the other famous astrologer of the other part of the world would have very limited chances or almost no chance to meet and interact with each other, but that's not the case today. When and I have my contemporaries like Lars Panaro, Vanita Lenka, or Vanita is probably a big senior to me, but my contemporaries like Lars and Fernando Raul, who are my close friends, I watch their videos and I learn a lot of stuff from them, and I'm sure they also watch whatever I have to say, or they also have. I mean, they also lend their ears to whatever I say. So that's how things turn out today, and I think that's what Varaha Mihira means in terms of modesty. So well proportioned limbs, all perfect and unimpaired. I think it's fairly important. It's important for astrologer to remain healthy, and it's impossible to do astrology with impairity or something like that. It's not that we are discriminating the differently abled, but today, if differently abled people are willing to learn astrology, I think we have that much development and that much humanity left in people to kind of help them learn astrology. So even that's not impossible today. So we can try and make that a wide statement that Varaha Mihira has given. So the next is impartial. It's important to remain impartial, because I think impartial is the quality of being honest to what our astrological senses say about a chart, a particular birth chart, and we should be true to our profession and true to what the birth chart says, and we should be somewhat constructive and truthful in terms of how we express. So it is imperative to understand that uh, we should not say what the client is expecting from us. Client always expects something positive, or no one really wants to hear a negative thing. It's not that everyone has only positive things in the chart. There are so many negative things, and people probably come to an astrologer only when they have some problems in life. There are people who kind of visit an astrologer on an annual basis or half yearly basis, but still largely I think people remember astrology and God only when they need only when they need some help or direction in their life. So that's one of the key points as to remaining impartial. Free from malice, astrologer certainly should not kind of went out maleficence or something like that. It is important for astrologer to stay good and try to be a good human being, because at the end of the day, we are at public service, and we need to put ourselves in the shoes of our client and try to be empathetic at all situations, and at least if not benefic, let's not try and be let's try and not be malefic. So I think that's a very important point. So fine hands, feet, nails, eyes, chin, teeth, ears, forehead, eyebrows, and head. Handsome physique. I think I already spoke about this. And handsome physique, maybe for some people, but not for all. For merits and demerits are generally the reflections of good and bad physical features. So the, I mean, the bad physical features kind of directly relates to some kind of uh, like disproportionate limbs or some kind of problem in the body that an astrologer is having, or a particular person is having who is willing to be an astrologer or something like that. And I don't think that necessarily has any connection with the nature of the person, because that's far from what a nature is. And yeah, so I think this is it that I have for this particular video on the series. And I'll get back to you with with another sloka or another phrase where I explain much more about how an astrologer should be and who's an astrologer, and what an astrologer should do, and so on. So let's find answers to this question. And I mean, let's kind of at least debug what's already there, and if there is something wrong from I mean, that is something unacceptable from the antiquity that is still being pushed into the current generation. I think let's just brainstorm things and find out what works out today and what does not work out today. And until then, bye bye.